Everybody, I'm Ryan Jones, Interim Executive Officer of the Penn State Alumni Association, welcoming you to the latest edition of the People of Penn State podcast. Thanks so much for joining us. Our guest today is Dr. Jenni Hesterman. Jenni is a retired Air Force colonel who served in 3 Pentagon tours and commanded multiple times in the battlefield. Her final assignment was as Vice Commander at Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland, where she led installation security, including protection of Air Force One. She is a counter-terrorism expert who provides security assessments for critical infrastructure. Dr. Hesterman is a professor, author of 2 books, and an in-demand public speaker. She is also an explorer, I think we'll talk more about that, who has stood at both the North and South Poles, is an analog astronaut, I'm very curious to know more about that, and is training for space. Jenni, thanks so much, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Ryan. It's really nice to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. So you're an 86 EMS grad, right?
Yes, I am. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, curious, I guess, for starters, if you could talk a little bit about your path to Penn State and sort of what you were involved in once you were here on campus.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm from Latrobe, Pennsylvania, which is a small town east of Pittsburgh. And I grew up loving all science. I could have majored in any science, but I really love the weather. And so I used to be one of those people that when there was a tornado warning, I would be out in the yard looking for the tornado while my parents were yelling for me to come back in the house. Absolutely love the weather. So I wanted to be a meteorology major, and I looked at universities, and Penn State, of course, has the best meteorology program in the country. And that's what took me to Penn State. Also, I had some cousins who graduated from Penn State. I mean, Penn State was part of our family tradition, watching football. Of course, because I'm from Pittsburgh, near Pittsburgh, a lot of people went to Pitt. But I did a tour of Penn State and absolutely fell in love with it. So that was my first choice. I graduated high school when I was 16, and I wanted to go to main campus. And my parents said, you know, we'd feel better if you went to a branch campus, obviously, because I was turning 17 in November. And so fortunately, Altoona campus is where I landed, and it was fantastic. It was a great place to start. So that's how I ended up at Penn State. I was involved in a lot of different activities. I love softball, I love volleyball, so a lot of sports. And then ROTC as well, which I'm sure we'll get to that.
Absolutely. And I should say I came from much farther away than Latrobe, but I spent my freshman year at Altoona as well. So
Okay.
we have that shared experience there.
Right, right.
And obviously, I'm sure you've known this from day one, but you clearly made the better choice when you decided to come to Penn State right now.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
So you got involved in ROTC. Did that start at Altoona or not until you got up to University Park?
It actually didn't. So going back to Latrobe, we have a little airport there, which is actually it's quite large now, thanks to Arnold Palmer. It's now the Arnold Palmer Regional Airport. We had a great air show every couple of years, and the Thunderbirds would come in or the Blue Angels. And I absolutely loved planes. I loved space. I was one of those girls that used to, or little kids, I guess, maybe the only girl that used to go to the library and camp out in the aisle that had space books and aviation books. I absolutely loved it. So I wanted to fly. So I learned to fly when I was 16. I soloed, and I kept taking lessons, but to be honest, it's quite expensive. And so I thought, well, maybe the Air Force could pay for this and teach me how to fly. So I went to Penn State, to Altoona campus, like I said, but they didn't have Air Force ROTC there. They only had Army ROTC, which I was not interested in. And so I had to wait until I went to main campus to join ROTC. So I joined as a junior. So between sophomore and junior year, I went to field training for 6 weeks at McConnell Air Force Base, Kansas. And I loved it, absolutely loved it. We flew on planes, we were on the flight line, we were around planes. And then I came back to Penn State to main campus for junior year and joined ROTC there. And unfortunately, my eyesight throughout college started to decline. It wasn't horrible, but it just went out of parameters for flying. And so when I was commissioned in 1986 from Penn State as a second lieutenant, I unfortunately did not go to pilot training. But I'll tell you what, I love the military so much, and I love the Air Force, and I just figured whatever they put me in, whatever job, I'm just going to be the best one that they've ever seen. And so then I entered as a second lieutenant into the Air Force, and my first duty station was at Moody Air Force Base, Georgia, which was a fighter base at the time. And I worked on the flight line. I was a war planner, operations plans. I did logistics. I was right down there in the flight line. So it was a really great way to start my career. Even though I couldn't fly, I was around flying. And of course, this dream of space continued through today. But we'll get to that. But it was fantastic place to start down there at Moody.
I bet. Yeah, I was going to ask that when you first mentioned that, you weren't able to be a pilot, but the fact that you were able to still be a part of, you were around the planes, you were part of the process for that, that was able to sort of be enough for you.
Absolutely. Yes, I loved it. I absolutely loved it. At Moody, so basically in the military, you move every couple years. So in the Air Force, we have a lot of bases, so we move about every 3 years. So I did my 3 years down there. I won a different awards, Officer of the Year, different things. And I didn't know it at the time, but my boss actually had flown a classified airplane a couple years before out in the Nevada desert. And so it was time for me to move, to rotate. And he said, "Hey, how would you like to go out and live in Las Vegas on the weekends and then fly out to the range and do some classified work all week from Monday through Friday?" And I was a single lieutenant, so I said, "This is great. I'd love to go out to Las Vegas and give this a try." I didn't know at the time that this was the stealth fighter wing, so America didn't even know we had this airplane. We had a lot of them, and we were flying at night over everybody's houses and didn't even know it. So I went out there, and it was a great 3 years. And again, I was a war planner. I was a tactical deception officer. I helped plan the operation that we did in Panama. It was the first operational test of the F-117. And again, just being around the planes, right? And just being around the flight line, being around the flying mission, that was enough for me. And I absolutely loved my Air Force career. I met my husband out there. He was a stealth fighter pilot. So that was another great thing that came of it. Still together after all these years. So it was a really fantastic assignment. And when it came to an end, again, it was time to move. And I ended up in Washington, D.C. for the first time. And I did work, as you said, at the Pentagon 3 times. And that next tour was actually working on Capitol Hill. So I was a liaison between the Air Force and the Pentagon and Capitol Hill. So any questions that came from members about the Air Force, whether it was maybe their constituents were upset about the sound, noise, things like that, anything about technical aspects of flying or different planes, I got all those answers from them from the Pentagon, and then took them over the hill basically and answered all the mail, and then also traveled with Congress. So those 2 assignments were really amazing. I think when I look back at my entire career, that was really cool.
I bet. Very different day to day from when you're out in Vegas, I'm sure, right? Doing
Yes.
stealth stealth bomber stuff. I'm sorry, the stealth bombers or the stealth fighters?
Stealth fighter, F-117 stealth fighter.
Make sure I got that right.
Mhm.
So it was 21 years total, your military career, correct?
21 years, yes. So I did that tour at the Pentagon. My husband and I were married. We went over to England and did a tour. We were both commanders at the same time. He was a flying squadron commander, and I was one of the support commanders. Actually got pregnant there. We moved back to the States. I had our daughter Sarah, who's 26. She'll be 27 in August. And so then we were dual military family, also with a child. So it got a little bit more complicated. But the Air Force, I have to say, kept us together. We just didn't ask for special bases. We didn't say we have to go to Hawaii, right, or Alaska or somewhere. We just said keep us together. And so what would happen would be we would go out to the field, we would command, or we would go to school, and then back to the Pentagon or back to the DC area, because there's the Pentagon, but there's also Andrews Air Force Base and Bolling Air Force Base. So we were able to both find jobs and sort of be out of each other's sphere, because when you're married as a couple in the military, you have to be careful that there's no perception of any kind of influence, or you're not working in the same office, for instance, or the same chain of command. So we had to kind of be careful of that. But we did a couple of those tours. On 9/11, I was a deputy base commander at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, which is in North Carolina. My husband was the operations group commander, so we had 3 squadrons of F-15s that took off and flew over DC within minutes. And I was responsible for securing the base and for all the people and supporting all the people at the base. I had to make some hard decisions. One of the decisions was to close the base gates because we didn't know if we were next as a target. We didn't know, like everybody in America, we didn't know what was happening that morning. So I had to make that decision, and our daughter was actually off the base at a preschool. So separated us from her, but I had to make that hard decision. So that's something that sticks out of my mind when I look back through my career, just difficult decisions that I had to make at difficult times. But we were able to stay together, and my last assignment in the Air Force was at Andrews Air Force Base. So I was the vice commander, and that's the home of Air Force One. If anyone's driven by it, it's a massive installation. We had 20,000 people working there every day as well, and a lot of other missions that I needed to support there. So that was a huge job, and it was really rewarding. And it was for President Bush and Laura Bush, and they were both fabulous. They were very kind. I'd see them in the middle of the night. I was the one standing at the bottom of the ladder. You see on CNN, there's that officer down there that salutes them and walks them back and forth between the helicopter or the motorcade. and the Air Force One plane. And so basically, we're assuring their security in that moment. Before they even come to Andrews, we give the okay, we're secure, we're safe, and all, thumbs up, and then they proceed and come to the base. So it's a lot of responsibility, a lot of sleepless nights, but it was an amazing last assignment. So I retired out of Andrews Air Force Base, and my husband at that point was a one-star general, and our daughter was 9. And so he received orders to England. So we packed up and moved to England for a year, and then we came back to DC for 5 years. And then my husband received orders to the Middle East for 2 years. So we moved to Doha, Qatar, and our daughter actually went to high school in Doha. And so we were over there for 2 years, came back to the States, and then he retired in 2016, and then we moved down here to Charleston, South Carolina. So that's kind of the progression and everything that I did for the Air Force, basically. A long time, 30 years, 29 years.
You covered a lot of ground, right? Or a lot of
Yeah.
area. But yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate that, certainly. I know the grind of that. I've had lots of friends and family in the military, and I think so many folks, if they haven't done it themselves, they at least know secondhand what a sacrifice that can be.
Absolutely. But it was fantastic. It was a sacrifice, but I have to say, I mean, we saw a lot of things. We saw the world, and the Air Force took very good care of our family, and we both had fantastic careers. So can't recommend it enough for anybody listening who's even interested remotely.
Well, that is incredible to hear. I'm curious because, and I'm sure I know the answer, because there's so many Penn Staters who go on in the military. I'm assuming you must have run into some fellow Nittany Lions when you were
I
serving.
did. I mean, we're everywhere too, but but to run across people who I was actually in ROTC with in the Air Force was really special. And you just be at a base, maybe even just shopping at the base exchange, which is like a little department store, and then you would see somebody from Penn State that you remembered from when you were cadets. During my master's program, I received one of my masters from Johns Hopkins, and one of my classmates, Donna Miyamasu, was there. She was going to night school at Johns Hopkins as well. I think we were both captains or maybe young majors at the time, but there she was. So it was really amazing to run into the people that I went through ROTC with, because it's a significant experience, right? It's a very emotional experience. We went through a lot together, and it's just really fun to run into everybody again around the world. And I stay in touch with, like a lot of Penn State alumni. I stay in touch with my past roommates, my past friends from the academic program. And I have to say, I didn't actually graduate with a meteorology degree. I never really finished that story. So my senior year, I was the cadet commander in the ROTC detachment, and I just could not. With meteorology is really hard. I mean, it's not just standing in front of a weather map. It's actually thermodynamics and some very difficult classes. And one of my courses, I couldn't do it. I had to drop it, and I couldn't take it again to the next fall, which would put me in the 5-year program. And for ROTC, you don't have a 5-year program. It's 4 years and you're commissioned and you're out. And of course, I wanted to be an Air Force officer. So I took my credits through the EMS to every department and said, who can get me across the finish line next summer? And the geography department said, we've got you. We can get you across the finish line. And they just took me in, and I was able to graduate with a degree in geography, which I loved. Like I said, I love all science. And so that geography was fantastic as well. And that's what I ended up graduating with. But kind of a great story, a Penn State story, where you're struggling and you're trying to have a plan, make a plan to finish, and everybody stepped in and said, we've got this. We're going to take care of you. And that's kind of a story that comes out from a lot of Penn State graduates, where something happened and they were just, everybody swoops in. It's like a family to take care of you.
Absolutely. That is awesome. I want to talk about your career post Air Force, right? You retired from the Air Force, but not retired from work. So the work you do now, how do you sort of, if this is the right way to phrase it, you help organizations balance being open and welcoming while also staying secure? So I say organizations, is that governmental? Is that private industry? What does that look like?
It's really everyone. And so what happened was, when I was a colonel in the Air Force, they send you to War College. So you either go to the Army War College, Navy War College, or the Air War College. And actually, I'm a geek. I love research and I love think tanks. And so I asked for permission to actually spend my year as a colonel at a think tank in DC. So I went to CSIS, which is a nonpartisan think tank, and I wore a business suit every day. And I went down there and I got to spend time with some people that did a lot of deep thinking about security, not just national security, but all different types of security, homeland security, cybersecurity. So I spent the whole year studying the intersection of organized crime and terrorism, and how these actors, even with different ideologies, work together, how they fundraise together, how they copy each other in terms of tactics. It's a topic that always fascinated me. So I spent a whole year on that. And what I found out was I was very passionate about it, and I absolutely threw myself into. I was supposed to do a 20-page paper, I think, for the Air Force, and it turned into a small book. It's like a 100-page book, and I won the research prize, which was a big surprise because the Air Force was like, "Why are you studying this topic? You're supposed to be looking at air power and Air Force things and Air Force history." But anyway, long story short, I had to come back to the Air Force, do more time, obviously. At Andrews, I worked with a lot of agencies. I worked with the FBI, with Secret Service. Of course, there were threats to the base, there were threats to the president. So I kind of started to get into that security space. And then when I retired, still had top secret clearance. And I mentioned that we went to England for a year. And when we came back to DC for 5 years, I worked as a cleared contractor. And I worked in some areas that I touched on before, like the intersection of organized crime and terrorism, but also the exploitation of the internet, social media, how they're out there recruiting, fundraising, you know, communicating, clandestine communication, the early dark web, things like that. So I spent a lot of time looking at the threat actors themselves, like the mind of a terrorist type of thing. And I started teaching online school as well. So I started teaching these courses. Obviously, when my husband came home and said we're going to move to the Middle East for 2 years, I couldn't do that work over there. I had to put my top secret clearance on the shelf, basically, and just put all my work aside and went and lived in the Middle East, which was fantastic. It's such an amazing experience. But I saw how they secured things like churches and schools, our daughter's high school, how they secured that, and how security can be beautiful. It doesn't have to be ugly. How once you go through some rigorous security, how you can really relax and enjoy yourself when you're on a property, whether you're flying or you're in church or you're at school or you're in the hospital. You're not thinking about security. You're not feeling threatened at all because the security is so strong on the outside of that outside ring, like kind of like that compound mentality that they have in the Middle East. So while I was sitting over there, I thought, you know what, I'm going to write a book. And somebody in the State Department had mentioned that this was called soft target hardening targets, just like the Capitol building, the Pentagon, things like that. But soft targets, that's where people are not thinking about security. They don't have money for security. They're very vulnerable. So I wrote this book, Soft Target Hardening, Protecting People from Attack. And what I did was harness everything I knew about protecting a base from the military, the mind of a bad actor, the threat actor, and then also how they were hardening in the Middle East, hardening these soft targets filled with vulnerable people. And unfortunately, ISIS started to carry out attacks. For instance, the Paris attack happened right after the book came out. And it was the security industry book of the year, only because I'm the only one who ever wrote on this topic. And it became, a word that everybody was using, soft target hardening. It was a phrase that everybody was talking about. So we came back to the US and I went full time into this area. So helping schools, churches, hospitals, businesses, even airports. I've worked with the NBA. I've worked with Major League Baseball, power stations, banks, credit unions. Anything that's a soft target that needs to protect people or protect their information, I get involved in that. So that's what I do now, and I go out and help people identify their vulnerabilities and try to figure out the best way to cover those. And there's security technology, but there's a lot of other tactics and techniques, obviously from the military, hardening would-be fences, layered defense, rings of defense around a target, things like that. So that's how I ended up in this. And I'm also an expert witness now. So if somebody is unfortunately killed or injured on a property and it was because of poor security or vulnerabilities that led to this environment that the attacker was successful, then if there's some type of a case like a premises liability lawsuit, then an expert like me is called in to look at those security vulnerabilities to see how that situation contributed to that person's injury or their death. So that's what I'm also working on right now. So that's a long story to explain how I got into security. But what's funny is I was going through my things recently, and I had totally forgotten that in high school I had to write a paper, like a capstone research paper as a senior, and the topic was school security. And even at the time, so this was 1982, and we'd had already some stabbings and some different things happening in high schools, but I was already thinking about security basically as a 16-year-old, and that was the topic of my paper. So I suppose that's been something throughout my life that I've focused on and had an interest in.
I guess it's obviously very different work from what you were doing, but obviously there's some similarities and overlaps as well. And it sounds like you found it very challenging and rewarding as well, your post-military career.
Absolutely. I mean, it's challenging because my clients and the people that I work with, A lot of times they don't have a lot of money, right? So I'll go out and I'll help a church, a rural church that just doesn't have money. And so it's really fun to try to find ways to help with their security that just doesn't cost money. Um, Other times I'll work for clients that have a lot of money and they're buying all the wrong things, security technology that they don't need, for instance, like gunshot detection systems and things that we call it right of bang. It's after the attack. I try to get them to shift into the preventative mode where we're trying to prevent the attack from happening, right? We have to mitigate if it does happen, but to kind of shift their mentality more like front loaded into preventative nature of things. So it's been really rewarding. Sometimes it's frustrating because sometimes it feels like it never gets better. School security, we've been working on this for years, and there's still things that happen with doors propped open, communications inside the school that don't work, just basic security 101 things. So it can be very frustrating. But when I go out and talk to clients, and I do a lot of training, I do a lot of conference speaking, and when the light bulb comes on and somebody says, "I never thought about that. I've never heard anybody say that before," then it's so rewarding because I feel like I've shared one piece of information maybe that will help them to amplify their efforts.
Absolutely. Want to transition a little bit here to your interest in space. You talked a little bit about that as a kid, flying, space, all that kind of stuff interested you. When did that become something that was a possibility for you to do in a more tangible way, I guess?
So, right when I was little, I mean, always at night, eyes in the sky. I was always out looking at the moon, the stars, telescope, binoculars, everything. When I came into the Air Force, there's opportunities for Air Force officers to go and be astronauts. Usually they're pilots, which I was not a pilot. Sometimes there's a mission specialist that they'll recruit for, but the window never opened for me when I was in the Air Force. Different reasons. We had the Challenger accident, obviously, when I was in at Penn State. Then we had the Columbia accident, so they would not open the astronaut pool for a while. Then they would open it again, but I wouldn't be able to apply because I was pregnant or whatever was happening. But it was okay. I was never disappointed. I never thought, oh, I'm not going to achieve my life goal. I just figured it just wasn't meant to be. I'm one of these people who believes that the universe kind of unfolds like it's supposed to. I don't try to like oversteer everything. So a couple years ago, when SpaceX had their first all civilian trip to space, there was a woman, Cyan Proctor, who went up to space. And when they were interviewing her and asked her about her path to space, and we had quite similar paths to be honest. She was a geoscience instructor. She wanted to be an astronaut. She'd applied, actually got pretty far through the process. She was roughly my age, so I thought, wow, she's just like me. And she said, I'm an analog astronaut and I test spacesuits and I test space food and I go live in these austere conditions. And we do human factors research. And I thought, I want to do that. That's amazing. If I can't go to space, like the next best thing is to test everything that's going to go to space. So I just threw myself into the community. So this was 2022. And the community was quite small at the time. Now we're large. I mean, space is booming. Obviously, business is booming. So there's a lot of these habitats coming online. But what we do is go out and live in different places. So I was out in Utah. We literally lived in a tin can, a two-story tin can. There were six of us women. It was an international crew. We were strangers. We'd never met. It was our first mission for all of us, and I was the commander of the mission. And that was really, really interesting. And everything I learned from the military obviously came flooding back, how to build a team, how to help with conflict resolution, emergency communications, or crisis. We had a lot of exercises where things would go bad and we'd have to figure it out. Every time we left this habitat, we had to have the full spacesuit on, and then we drove rovers. They're kind of like ATVs that they made into rovers. We're testing things all the time, testing things, equipment. We tested a robotic seal, like a baby seal that would be kind of like a pet in space. His name was Pero. And when he got to know you, he'd look in your eyes and get to know you. And for me, I'm a real snuggler, and I'd love up on Pero. And so as soon as I picked him up, he'd start purring and kind of curl up with me. And so we had time with Pero. Everything's an experiment. So we had fitness devices on. And it was measuring our blood pressure. Did our blood pressure go down? Did our pulse go down? We took up the diary. How did time with Pero make us feel? Then they would take Pero away from us. And then the next week, we would have to talk about how we missed having that connection, or we didn't, because three people on my crew did not like Pero. So it was quite interesting because, who would think that you're testing that for space? But it was really neat. So I've done that mission. And then last fall, I was in a cave in Spain and we tested an inflatable habitat. So when we land on Mars, the astronauts have to leave the spaceship right away because of radiation, and they'll go into a lava tube or a cave basically and live in a inflatable habitat. They'll have to expand it, and they'll have to figure out how to pressurize, get oxygen going, and live in this habitat. So companies are actually building this. It's really fascinating how much is on the shelf already, just waiting to go to space. So we tested an inflatable habitat, and we were lowered into the cave in a full astronaut outfit and helmet, the boots, the whole thing. And then we had to rappel in that all the way to the habitat, just like the astronauts will on Mars, because the habitat can't be near the entrance because of radiation. So we're always testing food, testing all types of equipment, robots, 3D printers, you name it, anything that might go to space or that actually has gone to space. Somebody test it, right? The astronauts don't participate in testing. They give them the food, they give them what they're going to use, and the back shop has basically tested everything. So that's what I'm working on.
That sounds, I mean, it's an important service, obviously, for these missions, but also just sounds, like you said, very cool. Very cool thing.
It's really fun. Yeah, absolutely love it. And I've met some really interesting people in the community. And one thing I love about the analog astronaut community is we're open to everybody. We're STEAM. We put the A in STEAM. We have a lot of artists, we have musicians, we have people writing poetry in these situations. And I absolutely love that. So we have everything from the hard sciences all the way down to the musicians that are in this community. And everybody's just passionate about one thing, and that's space
Yeah.
exploration.
You've been to both poles, right? The North and South Pole?
I have, yes. And so I went with my family. So this started as a family adventure. When we were in the Air Force, we couldn't do anything like this. First of all, you can't get the time off to go. We'd be lucky if we could get a week off, basically, but you need time to go do these things. But we kind of had a family bucket list that we wanted to knock out. So as soon as my husband retired and we were able to go to all these countries with security clearances, we weren't able to go. We started to just go through our bucket list. And so the first family trip we went to Kilimanjaro and did that. And then we decided we wanted to go to the South Pole. So we did the trip to the South Pole, which we flew into the interior of Antarctica on a very large Russian transport plane. And it landed on the ice, and we got out and camped in tents at this camp and waited for the weather to clear so that we could fly to the South Pole, which was another 3-hour flight on a small plane. And then we overnighted there. We camped out in tents there and looked at the station, which was very cool. And when we were at the South Pole, we thought we really need to go to the North Pole and see what's going on up there. So then we planned the next trip. We took a Russian icebreaker. We flew to Russia and we got in an icebreaker, and it took us a week to get up to the North Pole, breaking ice. And then we broke ice coming back down, and it was an absolutely incredible trip. So yes, we've done both poles, and we're a very adventurous family. We like to be
Sure.
outside and exploring, especially remote areas where a lot of people haven't gone.
Right, right. That's amazing. Um, you've both within your military experience and what you've done since, the travel, everything. Obviously, it sounds like it's been a really enriching way to live a life. What's your advice for women, I guess, in particular, right? Because I think these are still areas that people see as kind of male dominated, certainly much less so than they used to be. But what's your advice for anyone, particularly a young woman who might be interested in pursuing a career in the military or security or anything else?
That's a good question. I mean, obviously, I'm drawn to male-oriented fields. I don't like to say dominated, male-oriented career fields. As a young girl, I mean, I like to fish, and when my dad taught me to hunt. He taught me to fish. I was always an outdoor girl, and so I think I'm not afraid to get wet and dirty and cold and everything that you have to do for the military and for space. But I think for women, what I've found, and I do mentor a lot of young women. Actually, I mentor 2 women from Penn State and Coastal Carolina University, which is right up the road. I'm mentoring 2 women from there, and they're all 4 of them are going into male-oriented fields. And so the advice that I give them is just to be yourself, to be authentic. Um, I'm Italian, so I'm very emotional. I've cried at work before, I mean, you can't hide, you shouldn't hide who you are. You should always be your authentic self, whatever that is. Um, you have to have a thick skin, you have to be tough, you have to be strong. But I think if you can do the job, then no one's going to say you're just a woman. Why are you here? I never had that problem with the Air Force. I did some very um, cutting edge things when I came in the Air Force, like war planning. And even at my base, there were only like 3 female officers at my whole base when I came in 1986. There just weren't any female officers. And then I went out and I was a tactical reception officer. When I went to that training, I was the only woman in the room. And that throughout my life has been a theme, where with security conferences, there'll be like three of us basically. But I think just be yourself. I think that's probably my best advice. Be strong, find out what the standards are, meet the standards, work to meet those standards. And you don't have to overdo it. I think sometimes women, they're just, I don't want to say they put on a persona, but they're just not being their authentic selves. So I've found a way to do that in these male-oriented career fields and be successful. I never wanted somebody to say, "Oh, you're a good female officer," or "You're a good female security professional." I just want them to say, "You're a good officer. You're a good female, or you're a good security professional." I don't want that word female in front of it. I want to rise to the top of everybody. And so that's kind of the way that I went into it. And again, with the Air Force, like, I just never had any issues with that. If I could do the job, I got the job. I got the promotion. I got the award. It didn't have anything to do with being a woman or anything related to that. So I think it gave me a good start in life to realize that you can survive and be successful in these fields. But I never sacrificed who I was. I just figured if the Air Force didn't want me, then I would just go find something else to do. It wasn't my profession wasn't who I was as a person either. And I think sometimes when people get all wrapped up in that and it doesn't go well for them, then they're devastated. So don't forget that there's a big life out there outside of your job as well, and live that life. Because at the end, I mean, when I retired from Andrews, 21 years with the Air Force, I'd say like the best 21 years of my life potentially. Um, the next day somebody took my job and nobody really missed me. And that's what companies do as well. They build this whole pool of people that are waiting for you to leave so they can take your job. And somebody used to tell us in the Air Force, an older general, he used to say, the Air Force isn't going to be sitting with you next to you in a rocker on your front porch when you're growing old. That's not who's going to be there. So I always kind of put that in perspective. And I'm glad that I never put the Air Force ahead of like my friends, my family, my health, for instance, because now I turned 60 this year, and I'm just so thankful that I have energy and my health and surrounded by my family and everyone at this point in my life. So I did see people along the way sacrifice a lot, and lose their authenticity or other things for the job. And then in the end, that's how it is. It's like pulling your finger out of a glass of water, it just all fills in without you. So that's some also advice for everybody, not just for women.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's universal, and it's great perspective. All right, to wrap up here, we have a lightning round that we close out our podcast with. So a few questions for you, very Penn State focused, not surprisingly. For starters, what's a favorite place on campus? And this could be Altoona or University Park, or maybe one of each.
My favorite place on campus, and I come back because I'm on the board for EMS. I love the lawn in front of Old Main. There's just something about that lawn. That's the first place I go when I come back to campus.
Yeah, it's still it's a pretty iconic spot, especially on a nice day.
Yes.
If you had to pick one, creamy or ice cream or a grilled sticky?
Definitely grilled sticky.
Okay.
I miss those. I get them I have them ship them to me here in South Carolina.
Nice. And of course, you can always combine them, a little vanilla ice cream from the creamery.
That's true. You could, yeah, that's true.
Did you have your studying, your cramming for a test? What was your go-to snack that got you through a big test prep?
I love Domino's pizza. I can't eat it like I used to, but yeah, that was my go-to snack when I was studying. And I'm a night owl, so I'd pull those all-night shifts. And so, they'd bring the pizza into like at 11 or midnight, and that was just like heaven.
Was Otto's in the Kern building, the graduate building, right? Or was that at the Hub?
I think it was at the Hub. I want to say it was the Hub. I can't really remember exactly where it was. Yeah.
Neither of those look very much like they did when you and I were in school, so they've changed quite a bit. What's your favorite Penn State item? It could be an item of clothing or something else that you still own.
So I still have a full Coke bottle from 1986 National Championship year. It has all the games on it. And that thing, I wrapped it in bubble wrap because we moved. I think I moved like 13 times. My husband actually was in longer than me. I think he moved like 15 times with the Air Force. So that thing was wrapped in bubble wrap, like quadruple wrapped. And that was like precious cargo every time that we moved. And somehow it survived all the moves everywhere that we went, which is pretty crazy. But that's probably, it's sitting on my dresser. It's one of my prized collection pieces.
All these years.
Yeah, still have it.
All right. Well, Jenni, thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation and learning more about your really impressive career path in life and how Penn State kind of gave you the foundation for so much of that. Appreciate the time and best of luck in your continued work and enjoying life with your family down there in Charleston.
Thank you so much, Ryan. I really appreciate it. And I hope someday I can go to space and take something from Penn State with me. Probably not the Coke bottle, but maybe something else.
If you send us, send you something, please let us know. We can do that.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you. That's awesome. Thanks.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Take care.
Take care.